My name is Milan Markovic. I'm the acting regional representative of the United Nations Human Rights Office for Europe in Brussels.
First question. What was the underlying need of the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization, including in emergencies, and why is it important?
It is extremely important because there are several aspects to the adoption of this document. On one side, any kind of clarification or guidance directed at the member states and member state signatories to the CRPD Convention are always useful as they bring a little bit closer the meaning and the paradigm shift of the Convention, and they make it more operational to those who are in obligation to implement them further. But at the same time, it is very important that this particular aspect, this particular right and duty within the Convention is addressed, because the practice has shown that institutionalized care, as opposed to an independent living in a community with all the support needed and available, is still a predominant practice, and it still represents one of the gravest human rights violations and forms of discrimination in the world now.
These guidelines are an important contribution for the fight of DI. But now that the guidelines have been adopted, does it mean the fight is over? What should be the next step?
The fight is not over, and in so many senses the fight has just begun, especially taking into account the number of persons with disabilities affected by the practices of forced institutionalization and all the other risks imposed through the practice of institutionalization, such as coercive treatment, risks to bodily and mental integrity, and other risks to human rights and dignity that do exist in institutional care. The next steps would be for sure multifaceted. The advocacy needs to be continued, especially in the partnership between the civil society organizations representing different types of impairment and different groups of persons with disabilities, but also cross-sectionally groups that are underrepresented in the disability movement. And I do believe that regional organizations, and in this case the European Union as the signatory to CRPD, do have a very important role to play, especially in accelerating their compliance with UN CRPD standards, Article 19, and support the member states, but also their own policies as concerns deinstitutionalization and stopping the investments into continuing the institutional care in member states and beyond.
Is there some guiding process to help state or push them to apply the guidelines?
Guidelines on their own are a very comprehensive document, and a lot of participation, different views and expertise has been invested into drafting this document. However, what I do find very useful is the openness of the committee members to further support the member states and relevant actors in their understanding and follow-up to these guidelines, and more generally, of course, to the standards contained in the UN CRPD Convention. However, what I would really like to underline is that I find that any kind of discussion among the main stakeholders, and this includes the United Nations, the European Union, different bodies and agencies, and the civil society, and organizations of persons with disabilities, is always very useful in clarifying mutual responsibilities and accountability of duty bearers, but also how to proceed further in realizing human rights in a particular context. What I would always put out as an advice to member states is to follow the expertise and experience and the data collected and owned by the organizations of persons with disabilities and the civil society organizations that can tremendously help member states in realizing their duties according to CRPD Convention. It is very important to be reminded that the human rights are universal, and that people with disabilities and those that do not experience disabilities deserve the same treatment and same access to human rights. As the institutionalization is one of the main messages for this Day of Persons with Disabilities, it is very important that we keep our fight together with organizations of persons with disabilities, civil society, and duty bearers towards a moment where all of us live based on our own choices and preferences in a community of our choice with the support that we need and choose.